I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, young, dumb and full of resentment for the place I was born and raised, so I did everything I could to get away from it. I travelled to the US, Canada, and then on to Europe and the Middle East, hoping that I could find someone, something, or somewhere that would give me enough of a reason to never ever have to go back to the boring place that I begrudgingly called home. You might be surprised to hear that I didn't actually find any of those things, and in fact, it was kind of boring. I spent the first half of my 20s in a depressive cycle where I would be living at home and then I would decide to go somewhere else across the world, and I would spend some time there and I would have some momentary relief as I was in a new area with new people and new things to do. And then eventually, due to money or visa restrictions, I had to come back to where I'm from, and then I would get depressed again. I would resent where I was from, I would resent the people, I would blame everything outside of me as to what was going on inside of me, and then I would go away again, and then this cycle kept on going and going and going.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Greetings, it's time today for another Anadromous dialogue. Today with author Lucy Lethbridge, who lives in London and wrote a book a little over a year ago, I guess. I first heard about it on The Rest is History with Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, and it's about a subject I've been researching more, and that is on tourism. And the book is called Tourists, and it has to do with how the British first discovered popular tourism. And this is at the beginnings of the 19th century. And we had a very interesting dialogue, and I think you'll find it interesting too, because most of you are going to travel somewhere, and some of the things you'll run into are the strange glitches in reality that we discuss. Some of this odd sense of inauthenticity when you go someplace, or the overcrowding, or all of these other things. But we also delve into history. So, before we do, just a reminder, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and what else? It's Here, Rescued from Alaska. This year, my first ever book, 3 Motions. Motions is an old English word for puppet shows. Indeed, there are 3 puppet plays here written by myself for my Alaskan puppetry classes, including my versions of the medieval classic Everyman, cleverly entitled Every Puppet, and even better, my retelling of the Faust legend, updated for the 21st century, also very cleverly, with a special introductory essay on the meaning of puppetry. Now, are these 50-page booklets physically worth the $25 price? No. But this isn't about material possessions. This is about being part of this odd channel and whatever it is we're doing here, trying to understand things. And these little booklets are unique. Each one is numbered and signed by yours truly. When they sell out, they are gone. I will never reprint them. Special deals if you want multiple copies for a production of your own. Just let me know you're doing it. That's $25 for the USA, Canada, Mexico, most of Europe. There may be some corners, like, I don't know, Russia, etc., and might require some extra money, as would Asia, Latin America, and Africa, or Tonga, or Australia probably. I'll have to add another $5 or so, depending on where you're from. But part of the money goes to my assistants who are shipping these from me from their respective American and European locations. Use the links below, PayPal, GoFundMe, and make sure you add the word book, B-O-O-K, book, to let me know this is not just a normal contribution to the channel, which you can still make. This book will not last long. Help me keep the channel alive. I get no other funding except from you, the viewer. I don't get it from YouTube. I don't get sponsorships. It's up to you. If you appreciate what I do on this channel, get a book. It's a great way to remember what this channel was about, and it'll be something unique because they're all signed and numbered. Well, let's get on to our discussion with Lucy. You're going to find it interesting. Okay, well, I have with me today Lucy Lethbridge, who has written a book I found very fascinating. I heard about it first on The Rest is History, and you were interviewed there. The book is called Tourists. Actually, let me show this. We can talk while this is being seen by people. So these are a couple different covers to the book. Was there a reason they changed the cover? Is one American? No, probably not.
No, they're both British, but one of them is paperback. The second one, the one in the train, is paperback, and that's occasionally they do that. They sort of refresh it in the paperback.
Right. Yeah, the second one looks more like an advertisement from the early 20th century or late 19th century, I think.
Yes, I think it's the 1930s. It's one of those 1930s railway posters, which were very popular, which were actually commissioned by the British Tourist Board. They commissioned these well-known graphic artists, people like Revilius, things, to do posters. Yeah, that period is quite nice for posters. It's kind of Art Deco edge. You had written a book about servants, called Servants, which is about what the British would call downstairs in the manor house, I guess. The people who work underneath. But then you shifted to tourism. What motivated you to do that? Well, I think, as you say, I had written a book about, really it was about the changes in 20th century everyday life, but I did it through the voices, or rather, my intention was to do it through the voices of the sort of unseen people in the house who were witnesses and in fact manifestations of enormous waves of social change in the mid-20th century. In 1900, domestic service in the broadest sense occupied a quarter of the population. And so it was within living memory in the early 21st century. My mother, who came from a sort of prosperous but not grand upper middle class home, they had 9 indoor staff. 9. My mother is still alive. So I wanted to look at this strange way in which within living memory that these changes had taken place. And then that led me to think further about the other changes in everyday life. And one of the great ones, of course, about that is the idea of travel, of holidays, and in particular the notion of the tourist, which in the 18th century was largely about and emerged from the Grand Tour, which was the tour of the sites of classical antiquity, which were the sort of foundations and furnishing of the gentleman of leisure. But with the coming of steam travel, that changes and it becomes less an occupation of leisure than an occupation of workers. And so you get enshrined by about 1840, the idea that we have this thing called a holiday, which would have been unthinkable 200 years ago. And yet now, of course, is part of the way we live. We work and then break and then work. It is fascinating. One of the things I was going to talk with you about is this mysterious thing called the beach, which I think a couple of 100 years ago would have been a place where you went to pick clams or something like that, and eventually became this place. Let me show you a couple of clips that I have. These are very short, about 20, 30 seconds each.
This one is from Durban, South Africa.
Those are some of the live pictures coming through at the Durban beaches. Now, hundreds and thousands of sunbathers have made their way to the Durban beaches, basically to celebrate their December 16 Reconciliation Day. But what I can tell you right now is that the people who have their hands full are basically the police and some of the lifeguards here at the Durban beaches. What I can also tell you that right now the temperature is about 28 degrees Celsius. So you can also imagine that it's scorching hot. But with me, I've got one of the lifeguards, who will just give us a brief diagnosis of the conditions today at the beach, and he'll more or less tell us whether they have their hands full or not. Thank you very much, Sihle, for your time. In brief, what's the current situation at our Durban beaches?
Good day to all the viewers. At the moment, we are experiencing low tides and light northeasterly winds, which it's not really playing in our favors as lifeguards. And the conditions at the moment rather dangerous than normal. At the moment, the guys are trying to swim a bit further out to sea, which is highly dangerous because as soon as you get to the drop off, you get caught by the rip currents.
And that second one was a little closer to your home, Bournemouth, and but it's just there's pictures of beaches, Chinese beaches, where you can't even move, and yet somehow there's this magnetic draw to this thing, and you get into talking about how this began. I believe it was for health reasons. Is that what I'm?
Yes, I think. Well, I think that there's a whole change of understanding about. I mean, primarily the purpose of the sea is I mean, up to the 18th century, the poorest people lived on the edges of places like the sea and the coast, because the soil was so poor, you couldn't grow anything there. It was too sandy, and so fishing was the only occupation, more or less, that you could do on the coast. But then towards the 18th century, the end of the 18th century, developed this idea that the sea and the sea air and sea bathing are actually very good for you, which in many ways they are. And so what had once been very inhospitable places became slowly developed. The Victorians were obsessed by air as a cure for TB, which of course was one of the most the biggest killers of the 19th century, consumption. And they were obsessed with finding places where your lungs could heal. I mean, we now know, of course, that all this was futile, that change of air doesn't help your lungs. But so you then get, as well as the idea of swimming in the sea, you get this idea of the change to what you might call tonic air that was good for you, air that actually uplifted you or sort of depressed you. It was either tonic or relaxing air, and that starts to develop the Mediterranean. So there's what we now call the French and Italian Riviera, was once these clusters of incredibly poor little fishing villages. But in the space of about a decade, in the mid-19th century, they became developed as watering holes for people with consumption or similar kind of slightly nameless ailments, who would go there to take the air in the winter. So you would winter. But you certainly didn't seek the sun. What you were doing was you might be seeking warmth, but it's change of air. It was in Menton, which was very popular. It was the dry air of a winter, winter warmth that would be attractive to you. And we don't actually start seeking out the sun in order to bathe in it and or until the very end of the 19th century, when the fashion for white skin begins to recede, largely because it was associated with consumption, it was associated with death.
Right. And also prior to that, the burnished bronze skin would be associated with workers who are now moving into the factories.
That's right. It was associated with outside work, and therefore it was sort of déclassé.
Right. And that's funny. It's interesting how just a little thing like tourism at the beach ends up having so many repercussions into the social life of really how much of the world is affected by the beach culture now, whether it's tourism in Thailand or, these mega crowds in a Chinese beach or but it changes the fashions because, you start off with those, they used to have those carts that went down into the water so that women could get out delicately without being seen too much. You have to get in the water, even though they were, like, by our standards, completely clothed.
The exposure of skin, I think, which you begin to get after the First World War, is really enormously. It just changes cultural ideas, particularly about women. It's in the most extraordinary way. If you look at people promenading in Menton, say, in 1912, and they're wearing enormous hats and huge long dresses, they're completely covered up. And then in 1920, women are showing really, the amount of flesh you might see on a beach now.
Right.
And, we perhaps don't, one can only imagine how extraordinary that must have been for people who lived through it, the difference in attitudes.
Yeah, the immediate post-World War I period sees the next 5 years or more see quite a stunning change in fashions in that period. Prior to that, they still seem like they're part of, loosely related to the Victorian era. But after that, you really see this radical shift, of which I guess bathing played a good part. Because at the beginning of the 20th century, for instance, that's when you first start having Coney Island in New York City. And the idea of going to a place, obviously, one of the things that happens, and you go into this, is that the beach isn't just simply for bathing on the beach, but becomes kind of an amusement park of sorts. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think also, I think one of the things I looked at in my book was the way in which travel, so I'll rephrase that, the way in which tourism, in the sense that we understand it, changed the idea of the purpose of travel. So originally you went to look at things. So, Thomas Cook would take people to Florence and they would be going on a tour. Now, an awful lot of people still do that. But nonetheless, culturally, we now have the idea of a holiday which is a kind of space from doing anything. I'm sure, you've had conversations with people. I certainly have, when people say, I'm just looking forward to lying on the beach and doing nothing. Now, that would have been inconceivable even to someone of great, who never worked, of great sort of leisure in the 18th or 19th century. In fact, it would have been morally reprehensible, the idea that you do nothing. But I think that it's a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, in which work becomes much more regulated. It's much more timetabled. It's much more bureaucratic. Offices have rules. So the idea of space from work is actually the doing nothing is a very important response to that. That I think.
Well, I think the Industrial Revolution, let's go back a little bit here from the beach back into the beginning area of your book. And the Industrial Revolution brings in the schedule, which, especially as people work in factories. Although I'm told during the French Revolution and before, say in France, people didn't have the schedules we now associate with factories, that they would come in, work for a while at this collective task, and then part again. And it's only after the Industrial Revolution that you have the schedule becomes the boss, essentially. And so people
Yes.
are regimented, and then they need a break from that schedule.
I think that is a very important aspect in the rise of the kind of, as it one would say, the beach holiday, the doing nothing holiday. And I also think, I mean, without wanting to be too sort of over dramatic about it, that I think all our holidays, our Western style holidays, are responses, are sort of nostalgic responses to the Industrial Revolution. They are in some sense a search for the pre-industrial. And the beach is part of that, I think. Although, beaches have been industrialized very heavily, they are nonetheless the idea of sort of nakedness and drunkenness and a kind of bucolic immersion in nature, in water and sand and all those things, and weather and heat, is about a lost Eden. And it drives the tourist fascination with things like peasant cultures, which are then preserved, often rather artificially, for tourists to look at. These are fragments, and for the British, where the Industrial Revolution went very quickly, it is particularly poignant, I think. Peasant cultures have a particular place in our longings, our national longings, because we lost them so quickly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that artificiality of the cultures in a little bit later. But one of the things I noticed in the beginning of your book, now your book deals specifically with Britain, a little more specifically with England, and you deal with not with the Romantic era. You refer to it, but you don't talk about the first mountain climbers or, Shelley or these different people going up into the mountains and having this sublime experience and all of that, which is really the discovery of the Alps in a sense, as a tourist destination. And then you have the Swiss hoteliers who are become some of the first people in the world in the modern era who realize what we can do here to capitalize on our environment. But rather you deal with that's almost like the Big Bang that happened earlier along with the Grand Tour and all of these things. Mm-hmm. But your book deals mostly with now, Joe and Mary who live, and they have a regular life. Maybe they go to a church. They're having, but they need a break. But they want a break to do them good. Originally, you have all these really what we would call positive vacations. Educational vacations. Supposedly, like the tour to Venice or something. It's supposed to be educational. Or the whole thing with the beach being about health. It isn't about pure hedonism yet. Although there's an aspect of that with the young male. Men going off during the Grand Tour, and I think there's a prehistory there. But you start mentioning this thing of these dioramas and panoramas that are these kind of substitute trips. Can you explain how that whole thing started? Where you have, and I notice it's a thing that starts this. It seems to start the artificiality idea of the vacation. I mean, today we have videos and TV shows. Rick Steves will take you to Ireland or something like this, or you have you can go to a movie like The Sound of Music or something, and you get the idea of the place, but of course it's not really the place. I mean, and so today you have people going to Salzburg in Austria and taking a Sound of Music tour, which is very strange. But it seems to go back to these original devices for creating for the people who couldn't go right away, these distant places. Can you maybe talk about that for a while?
Yeah, I think that, well, I think that the dioramas, the great diorama king was someone called Albert Smith, who was the first person who, as it were, did dioramas or conducted dioramas, because he was a great showman, about his own travels. And he was a very popular figure. He had these dioramas that ran in Piccadilly for thousands of performances, in which he was a raconteur. He would tell the story of, first of all, he told the story of going overland to India. And most popularly, he told the story of climbing Mont Blanc. And it was due to him, really, that the mountains were conquered by the kind of group tourism, which then became the skiing holiday and the kind of winter sporting holiday, that really was viewed with absolute horror by the Romantics, the Ruskin, Leslie Stevens, and so on, who had viewed the Alps as a sacred place. I mean, they were allowed to climb it, but they didn't want anyone else to climb it. And I think that is one of the central themes of tourism, is that no one likes to feel that they are the tourist. And so wherever we go, we find particularly our own countrymen crowding out, I don't know, St. Peter's or the Colosseum or something. It is we like to think we're looking for a singularity of experience, and of course that is very, very hard to find now, because everything is now filtered through this touristic, almost this view of places that in a way is prescribed before we even start. So Albert Smith saw this very clearly, even in the 1840s, and he talked about putting the Alps in a box. And I think that that's a very vivid image of the way that tourism, what does it do? It opens the world, but it closes it at the same time. There are many paradoxes in tourism, but that I think is a very crucial one. And I think now with things like Instagram, the images that we have of the great places of the world mean there's almost a sort of built-in disappointment when you get there. It can never look quite as empty or as unspoiled. The sunset will never rise quite as wonderfully as it did with that filtered Instagram picture that you saw. And I think that is a product of the mass industrialization of the touristic experience. Quite what you do, but I don't think I have no answer about what you do about that. And maybe the sadness that is built into the tourist experience is something that,
Let me show you something. You'll find this interesting. It's from a Max Ophuls movie in the middle of the 20th century called Letter from an Unknown Woman. And there's a scene in it where he was often dealing with his childhood in Vienna and his youth there. And he captures this, what he obviously experienced of a train in a carnival fair setting that gave you a diorama. And this is about 40 seconds long, but this will give people an idea of the kinds of dioramas and such you were talking about.
Switzerland.
You were looking down at the flying fish. Then what? Aren't you going to finish the trip?
Well, there weren't any trips. Do you mind? You see, my father had a friend in a travel bureau. My father worked across the street. He was an assistant superintendent of the municipal waterworks. And he used to bring folders home with him with pictures in them. We have stacks of them.
Do you know, I love that film, but I have never remembered seeing that. That was brilliant, because that really is exactly, that captures exactly, I think, the way in which places come to be represented by images, you know, and you know the cuckoo clock and the mountain for Switzerland, the pyramid and the palm tree for Egypt, you know.
It's a preview of Disney World, where you go into the Epcot Center, and there's a part of it that has an imitation of Norway and an imitation of Mexico and an imitation of of England or Britain and English and even an imitation of America, which I think is really fun since you're there. But there's something about this process I find it. And it creates, one of the things I'm doing is I'm working on a longer series, which I probably won't get around to till the end of the year. And it's about tourism and reality. And I find that something happens. There's something that happens in this process where these unrealities start to, for instance, I lived in Alaska for 22 years. And for 10 of those years, I worked in the tourism industry as helping people coming off of cruise ships. And they literally didn't know where they were. They're in this floating combination of a hotel and Las Vegas, moving around. Suddenly they get out and they're in a fjord surrounded by mountains, and then they go down to maybe some of them will wander around the town. Others will immediately be whisked off to various sorts of concession rides or tours, that local tours. Some of them, like for instance, in our area, we had tours that were for. There used to be a salmon bake and Tlingit dancers. Tlingits are kind of Indian. And of course, the people who were doing the dancing weren't necessarily the Indians. They were a combination of people from the village and stuff. You were seeing something done for the tourists. Just as in Sitka, Alaska, there used to be Russian heritage there. It used to be New Archangel. And they would have Russian dancers. Well, there wasn't a Russian to be found among them. So you would create this idea of what the past was like. I was in the area in 1998 in Skagway. In 1898 is when the gold rush came through on their way to the Yukon. And I often said, they're celebrating 1898, but no one's ever going to celebrate 1998 because it doesn't exist in Skagway. So it's... I know you have probably more interest in these than just the tourism in the past. How are you seeing some of the things that are developing in our world today with tourism?
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think that sense of elegy, which is central to tourism, was there quite near the beginning. I mean, I read, if you read the very early guidebooks from about 1818, they will often talk about hunting out the last people that still wear national dress, or the search for some sort of singularity of place, I think has been central to the tourist experience for a long time. But I think it's a failure of cultural confidence that we don't tend to look at what is new. I mean, that's not, of course there are places like, people do like going to the Pompidou Center, or, there are areas of, or the Sydney Opera House. There are places that express some sort of 20th or 21st century cultural confidence that are popular. But on the whole, we're looking for something that isn't standardized. And globalization has brought this standardization, which I think has made us want to search out singularity in a way that can only be artificial. It's because we live in a world which is increasingly blandified by this sort of mass commercialized consumerist standardization. So I mean, it will be interesting. Maybe generations in the future will find some other confidence about where they are, and find something to look at that doesn't automatically include the past. But I can't really at the moment imagine what that would be like. So yes, I don't know. I mean, one of the things I have noticed, though, actually, is that when I was looking through books and diaries and things of 19th, early 20th century, no one is interested in food. And of course, now the touristic experience, food is enormously important. I mean, it's much more important even than it was when I was a child in the 1970s. So when we travelled, we didn't travel for food. Food was a sort of occasionally an interesting curiosity of a place where you travelled. But I think that food has become one of those things that there are all sorts of sort of artisanal survivals now that are due to tourism, and that is that can only be a good thing. And there's much more curiosity.
Yeah, well, there's music, different kinds of theater and such, which survive on the tourist market almost exclusively. Would there be a Broadway scene in New York without tourists?
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, actually, let me show you something here. I have one more little clip to show you. And this is one I took myself. Actually, I have two more. First, I'll save the last one for the end, see if you can guess where it is. This is just, I went into, in 2018, I was staying with some friends in Paris, and they said, oh, it's free day, Sunday at the Louvre. So go ahead and go down there. So I said, okay, I will. And I got there, and the line was just incredibly long. And everybody gets in there at once. And of course, what do so many of them do? They go straight for the Mona Lisa. And so I said, well, I'm going to go in there, and I'm not going to film the Mona Lisa. I'm going to film the people filming the Mona Lisa, because I just found it. And I asked myself, what are they doing? Do they know what they're doing? This is just about a minute clip. Watch this one poor young girl who is, she's got a couple of braids. She's shorter than the people who are crowding in front of her. She's trying to look, and then she just kind of gives up. Let's watch this.
That to me is like a vision of modern hell.
Well, here's the thing is, did anybody there realize nobody was actually seeing the Mona Lisa? Because the Mona Lisa, well, Walker Percy says it's a preformed symbol complex. You go up there, you have all these ideas that come from postcards and books and movies and all this stuff. And you just go up there, and all these, some people are way up front trying to pretend like they're alone with the Mona Lisa with a selfie. And you look, and sometimes if you just watch a person, the amount of time they get up there, they take their photo, and they go back. So I guess they're going to look at it when they go back, but couldn't they just buy a book or a postcard that has a better image than anything they took? It's just such a strange glitch in reality.
I think that I mean, of course, photography has changed forever the way we see everything, and the ease with which we now photograph, and the constant way we now chronicle everything we do through the medium of our phones, I think has changed our relationship to culture absolutely immeasurably. But I often think that when you look at people taking photographs now, it's really what they're doing is the idea is that you're storing it away for future use, aren't you? That you know that the moment can't really deliver. The moment can't deliver what the Mona Lisa is. You rather think in an inchoate way that the Mona Lisa should deliver something to you. But you know that that's not really deliverable in the huge crowd. So you're getting a glimpse to snatch away and to squirrel it away. And later you'll get it out, have a look, and hope that you can retrieve something. And of course, mostly you don't. You've got 1,000 pictures on your phone and you forget that you've seen the Mona Lisa. And as you say, anyway, the postcard is going to be immeasurably better than anything you could possibly take under those circumstances. So it's an odd relationship with the now, isn't it? With the moment, the present.
Yeah, it's very strange. And here's one of the things that I think about in relationship to tourism. We are soaked in these images that are coming from outside that say Venice, or go to London, or go to Prague, or go to Thailand, or go to Japan, or go to Australia. Meanwhile, for instance, in America, the little towns in the middle of the country are being emptied out, and everyone has the same thing to say about them. They're boring. There's nothing to do there, which is really odd to me, that then people will spend money to go do something that they're almost not involved with. They're not, for instance, having lived in New York City as well, I know that the people who come to New York do not see New York. They see the tourist version of New York, which includes going to the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, and nowadays One World Trade Center, Times Square. None of these things anybody who lives in New York really wants to do. This is just simply, this is what we give to here. We'll throw this to you guys. You can go do that. We're going to go look for our own amusements and such. Sometimes it overlaps. Maybe there's a good museum show. But it is odd. Like, for instance, right now, I really want to go to Florence. And I'm sitting there going, when do I go? I don't want to go. Obviously, I don't want to go in the middle of the summer, because it's going to be completely crowded. Certainly not going to go around Christmas time. Not going to go around any holiday. In fact, it's always crowded. I'm sitting saying to myself, middle of January, hopefully it's really raining. The worst possible weather to keep people away. So I'm not, I went to the Vatican Museum in early December, and it was just completely crowded. And, can you see these things in any sort of way where you can have a few moments of contemplation? I
think that's been one of the sad things about tourism. I mean, so many of the sites of Western culture are religious, aren't they? At a time when religious practice is so very much on the decline. So I think that it's, to visit the Duomo, for which you have to queue forever and get a ticket and so on, is not to experience the Duomo as a place of it's a sort of shell, really, without religious practice. And I think that is well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because clearly the tourists are visiting the Duomo with some remnant. There's some kind of atavistic sense that this is important. And so we haven't completely lost that, but we're so increasingly separate from the daily observance which would have made that experience, made that experience so much richer, so much more culturally rich for us.
As you're talking, I'm thinking that it's almost like these things are haunted for people. And they know this was important, but most of them really don't understand why. You know, the little bit of reading they do online or in a tour book doesn't give them enough to, I mean, I understand Venice because I've been reading about masks, and I've been reading about, there's a great book that a guy wrote about nuns in Venice, and another book about how most people don't realize that they didn't just wear the masks at carnival season. During the heyday from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, they wore them about half the year. And they had all these significations of rank and such. And I'm sitting there going, oh, there's no way to get that back. As far as you're not going to see that when you go there, even if you go during carnival time. You're going to get some piece of the experience. And Walker Percy has a great essay called The Loss of the Creature, where he talks about, how do you see the Grand Canyon today? I mean, first of all, you've got a word called the Grand Canyon, which already is filling your head. And then you get there, and of course, it's just filled with people on the edge looking in.
Yeah.
And The Loss of the Creature, Walker Percy.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great essay on, he talks about there are different strategies for how we might get the Grand Canyon back. One is to find another trail. But he says then if you find a good trail, eventually the Park Service is going to say, oh, let's add that to our repertoire so other people can do it. Another one is to do what I did essentially with the Mona Lisas. Don't look at the thing itself, look at the people ignoring the thing. In other words, he says this is like New Yorker magazine articles, Joan Didion writing or something. And then he says another possibility is you're at one of these places and you're having the argument of your life with your significant other, and you realize the whole relationship is going to crash. And then you look and you go like, that's the Grand Canyon. It's like right behind you. And another one he did was really interesting. He talks about how during World War II, really badly wounded American soldiers will be taken back to the States. And since there was not a lot of tourism going on, they'd be taken to the north rim of the Grand Canyon to convalesce there. And he says, and you wake up and there's the Grand Canyon. It's like, how do you rediscover the thing? And that's something I've thought about for quite a long time. And I think a lot about why this staleness seems to have descended upon things, so that, the small towns in America just become extensions of Walmarts. That there's this repeated, everywhere I go. I live in Tbilisi, Georgia. Lots of McDonald's here, Wendy's, Colonel Sanders, KFC. There's Zara and H&M and, all of these Levi's, Lee's jeans, all of these repetitious things. And not just one of them, but, as every time they put up a new mall or something, the same stores show up there. Creating this kind of dead zone, and yet I feel that people, I look at things filled with texture, things filled with meaning, historical sites, as being like nutrition. We need this. Somehow we know we do, which is what draws us to it. But in the meanwhile, we put all this other stuff between us and the stuff that's out there that we need.
Well, I think also maybe, and I think that COVID, in this country, COVID taught us something about this, is that We need to discover the place we live.
Yeah.
If we are filled with images of places that are preferable and are relatively cheap to get to, then we neglect the place we live. And I think, I mean, I live in London, where we're going through this enormous surge of building at the moment, vast tower blocks that are indistinguishable from tower blocks
I was
in
there
Singapore.
Ago.
It's, for me, it's absolutely horrible. But, I can see there's but I think we might take a little more care of the houses that we built if we weren't always thinking that the place you live is, in some sense, not the place you yearn for. And I think if we had to explore the places within a radius of where we live, we would pay attention to them rather than hop on a plane to Bali. I mean, here, I'm not in London at the moment, I'm in Suffolk, where, with full of these amazing medieval churches, which are, filled with dust and they get visitors, but not very often. But but in a world where you could not fly, you might find within the radius of your own village enough excitements to be completely sustaining for you. I mean, maybe I'm probably being over romantic here, but I think it is
Here's what I do here is I will just get on. I don't know. I've been here 5 years, but there's still lots I don't know about the city. So I'll do something like get on a bus and go to the end of the line. And there's one bus that'll take me, 45 minutes away. And where we are is kind of in almost the basin of a valley in the Caucasus Mountains. And it'll take me up and up and up. And I'll just get out there and just look around. And actually, last year, I went to this one little town called Kojori. I spent $25 a night in a guest house, just explored this little nowhere, which I found fascinating. And then, because it was all downhill, walked home. It was like a 6-hour walk back. And that to me was, I feel like I'm here. It grounds me into the area. So.
No, I think it's like in London, where I was born and brought up. I've lived there all my life, but all sorts of bits I've never been to. And you just take yourself off to the end of the tube line somewhere in Metroland. You get off some stop called Oakwood, or some with some lovely sort of rural resonance, and there you find yourself. I mean, there's nothing to look at, and there's everything. It's different. It's and I think we have to. If we're going to survive the the sort of emptying of content which tourism brings with it, because tourism, I mean, a central paradox of tourism is that it kills what it desires, what it most desires. That if we're going to survive this death that tourism brings, then we have to rediscover something in ourselves of the real quester, the real, engagement with the world, that tourism should once promoted and now, I think, rather kills.
Right. Wasn't it E.M. Forster who said to find the wealth of the Indies, you have to bring the wealth of the Indies with you? In other words,
I think it was Dr. Johnson, wasn't it?
Like I say, I'm not sure exactly.
I think it was Dr. Johnson.
Read the book. Yeah. So, was that Johnson?
I think so. Yeah. I think it was Dr. Johnson.
Okay. But, my feeling is that, for instance, one thing I made a video ranking 25 species of tourism. I didn't get it all in there, but on the bottom is destructive tourism. So I look at sex tourism as destructive tourism. Stag party tourism is destructive tourism. And I go all the way up, ranking different kinds of tourism. And at the top is essentially being a visitor who feels at home somewhere. You're not, and you know what the place is, and you go there regularly. It's not just I think that hold on. It looks like I'm being cut off here. In the ranking of tourism, the more the person connects to the culture respectfully, and feels at home in it in some regard, the better the tourism. Does that make sense? Can you hear me? Am I being cut off?
No, you're not completely being cut off at all. No, I completely agree. But I mean, I don't know how to recreate that other than to quite brutally cut off the means by which people travel en masse.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, or yes, I mean, well, I think there's an enormous. We're living in the middle of an enormous cultural shift, aren't we? And maybe
we are.
Maybe this will be part of it. I don't know that I will see it, but maybe my the next generation will see it, or see the beginning of it.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Well, what I do is, one of the things I study is puppetry in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so when I show up in Prague or Paris or Palermo in Italy, Sicily, I go straight to the puppet theaters and the puppet people. And what that does is almost instantly puts me way outside the tourist zone. Yeah. And it puts me inside the culture in a way that most people don't get into. And I think the idea of traveling with an actual purpose is a nice corrective to the kind of simply feasting on the images, like they present you with an idea of you'll be alone on a beach in the Caribbean. And you're not going to be alone on a beach. If they're going to make any money, they're going to have to get a whole lot of other people there. And they're going to make their money off of things like liquor. They're trying to sell you an image that you're not going to get. So I think we need to be wise enough to see through that. And, but unfortunately, most people are, you dangle these things in front of them and they go for it because they need that break.
Yes. I mean, and the thing is, what one forgets that, personally, I'm in the sort of lucky position of I can travel with a certain amount of, I don't know what the word is. I don't have to follow the crowds. I work for myself, so that therefore I don't have a 1-2 week break a year and not much money, in which I have to, take an entire family somewhere, provide a holiday that I have a garden. I don't, I'm not stuck in a flat in a city with 3 children, and we need which I think is the reality of most cheap holidays. And one can, and that, as I say, that maybe we should start looking at the built environments that we make at home, in order that people should not have to always have to go to Spain, but can explore their own environment and be enriched by it. Because I think, because that, particularly for children, I think you're giving them a great gift if you can give them a sense of curiosity about the world they live in. I mean, the world that's there, rather than that they have to fly to.
Exactly. Well, before you have to go, and before we do, I just want to show you one piece of, this is a 20-second clip. I just want you to see if you can guess what kind of environment it is for tourism.
Ooh. Well, is it an ice rink with hologramic dancers on it?
Well, those are real dancers, and they're moving. It's a cruise ship.
Oh, wow. that is
Which
amazing.
is
So outside it's like the Caribbean or something, and inside it's fake snow inside the. Well, the cruise ship, of course, is the most extraordinary phenomenon, isn't it? Really, the modern cruise ship is the, unfortunately, we have no time to go into the modern cruise ship
yeah.
because that.
Well, Lucy, thank you for your time, and I look forward to your next book about strange, occultic practices or spiritism and all sorts of things at the beginning of the 20th century. Yeah. So I look forward to that. That is an area I'm very fascinated with. So
Good.
Well, maybe I'll get in touch with you again sometime. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye. Well, that was an interesting discussion, and I look forward to her next book. And I haven't read her book on servants, but you, if you're at all interested in tourism and the history of it, you really should buy her book, Tourists. And I'd like to thank Lucy for coming on, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching. And remember, there are ways to support the channel, links down below. Thanks for joining us today. And from Tbilisi, Georgia, where we say drobit, means temporarily. We'll catch up with each other again.
Attaching a lock that bears their names to the railings of the Pont des Arts and then throwing the key to the lock into the Seine has become a symbol of everlasting love. It's a tradition that's become so popular that the entire length of the bridge is covered in padlocks. On Sunday, nearly 2.5 meters of railings collapsed under the weight of those so-called locks of love. The bridge was closed down so that experts could remove the damaged railings and hundreds of padlocks. This isn't the first time part of the bridge has collapsed. One of the parapets gave way last summer too. Critics say the padlocks are a threat to the dozens of barges and boats that transport tourists and residents up and down the Seine every day.
When I go, I want you to give me 5 minutes. I told you boys I'm no escape artist. For the first time, I like the odds. If I ever run into any of you bums on a street corner, just let's pretend we never met before.
Follow the yellow brick road, homie.